A very good morning to all. Today, let's discuss the next topic, that is about formation of shadows. So, based on how objects transmit light, we can classify objects as three, that is transparent objects, translucent objects and opaque objects. So, let's discuss each of them one by one. The first one is transparent objects. So, what are transparent objects? Objects that allow light to pass through them. So, such objects are called transparent objects. For example, you can see clear glass, clear water. All these are examples for transparent objects. Why? Because they allow light to pass through them. And we can see clearly through these objects. So, these objects are called as transparent objects because they allow light to pass through them. The next type of object, that is translucent objects. So, what are translucent objects? Objects that allow light to pass through them but partially. So, these objects allow light to pass through them partially. So, such objects are called translucent objects. For example, foil paper, frosted glass, all these are examples for translucent objects. So, we cannot see clearly through these objects because these objects allow light to pass through them partially. So, such objects we call it as translucent object. The next is opaque objects. So, what are opaque objects? Objects that do not allow light to pass through them. So, these objects, for example, wood, stone, all these are examples for opaque objects because these objects do not allow light to pass through them and we cannot see through these objects. So, we discussed about transparent, translucent and opaque objects. Now, let's discuss about shadow. So, what is a shadow? Here you can see a person. Behind that, on the surface, you can see a dark area or we can say the dark patches. And that dark area is called as the shadow. The dark area that is formed is called as the shadow. Now, let's see how is shadow formed. So, when an opaque object comes in path of light, the light cannot travel further, it gets stopped. When light is stopped in its path of light by an object, a dark area is formed and that is the shadow. That dark area is called as the shadow. Now, let's consider this example. Here you can see the tree which is an opaque object and this tree, it blocks the light. That is, the light cannot pass through this object. And here you can see behind that, here you can see a dark area that is formed and that dark area or the dark patches, we call it as the shadow. So, this is how a shadow is formed. Now, let's see shadow formation by different objects. The first one is opaque objects. So, cast dark shadows as they block light completely. So, opaque objects, it casts dark shadows. Why? Because opaque objects does not allow light to pass through them. The opaque objects blocks the path of light. So, opaque objects, it always casts dark shadows. The next is transparent objects. So, what about transparent objects? Do not cast shadows as they do not block light. So, transparent objects do not cast shadows. Why? Because they allow light to pass through them, so that they do not cast shadows. The next, that is translucent objects. Cast faint shadows as they block light partially. So, what about translucent objects? They cast shadows. They cast faint shadows because they allow light to pass through them partially. So, that is about the shadow formation by different objects. Now, let's see factors affecting shadows. So, the size of the shadow, it depends on the position of the source of light from the object. So, the size of the shadow, it depends on the position of the source of light from the object. During morning and evening, the shadows are longer. And during afternoon, that is when the sun is overhead, the shadows are short. So, today we discussed about formation of shadows and we discussed about the objects, that is transparent, translucent and opaque objects, and we discussed about the formation of shadows by different objects. So, I hope it was clear to you. We'll meet in the next class and discuss the last topic. Till then, thank you.